Go around the table, introduce each other, uh, or we can sing. It's your choice.
Can the people hear us on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Banzi Botman, and I'm a law student activist, and I work for the office of the SRC. I'm a policy officer there.
I'm Marlene Leroux, and I'm just so honored to be here, and I'm a disability activist.
Magdalene Blankenberg, gender-based violence activist.
I'm Willem Verwoerd. I'm at the University of Stellenbosch working on transforming historical trauma.
I'm Mies de Klerk, community activist and a community warrior for change.
I am Dan Mpume. I work for PPS in Stellenbosch.
Kantin Kota as president at Zambia University.
I'm Lieutenant Mkwesibe. I'm representing Kaya Sustainable Development Agency based in Kayamandi, right in the center of Stellenbosch.
And the panel.
So guys, you that is online, you can introduce yourselves as well. Yeah. First one to unmute himself can start.
Hi, I'm Kristen Kornienko. I'm currently in Western Canada or Turtle Island, and I'd like to say Sani Bonani, Ninjani, Ngiyabanga Gakulu, Nongumema, Lapanamula. And I came to South Africa on a Fulbright in 2007 and stayed and did my PhD at Wits. And I wanted to just comment on the things I've heard yesterday and today, particularly Professor Verwoerd's comments on shame, Professor Madonsela's comments on the continent's role of sharing humanity, Mary Burton's call for acknowledgement, apology, and atonement, because arriving in South Africa in 2007 on that Fulbright, was the beginning of a very complex relationship for me with all those things, which has so enriched my life, and I am forever in debt to the continent of Africa, as I like to tell people. So. Yeah.
My name is Denai Nando. I'm a human rights lawyer, and I'm the country director for Change.org South Africa.
Hello everyone, I'm Tracy Ledger. I'm head of the Energy and Society program at the Public Affairs Research Institute in Johannesburg. Most of my work is around basic services and access to electricity and energy poverty, and it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Hi,
It's really great to see you, Mr. Vatley, because you write my textbooks. It's a very wonderful experience because in criminal law, Dr. Mary Nall, we dealt with restorative justice when we were dealing with theories of punishment. So when I saw your name, I was like, I have to see how it looks. So the world is very small, very, very small world.
Wow.
I think we can jump right into it and start with Dr. Willem Verwoerd, just for an opening statement with regards to public governance, democratic leadership, and access to justice.
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of time. I think I'm just going to basically make one point, based also on current work we're trying to do at Stellenbosch University, where there has been a public statement, an actual commitment to restitution, but that the growing frustration from people across the board, and especially our colleagues of color, Black colleagues, so there's this gap between what is being said at a policy level and what people are experiencing on the ground. And I suspect that's not unique to Stellenbosch University. So So I come with a facilitation background, working in conflict transformation in Israel, Palestine, and in Northern Ireland. And what I've learned is that you can make these national level interventions, you can even make legal policy-related interventions, but it's very difficult to deepen those processes unless there's also relational, deep work we do together to grapple with these deep historical roots. And for me, restitution then becomes an invitation to a restitutional process of deep relational journeying beyond charity, beyond from a distance trying to give something to the poor, and with a historical awareness that this is going to be a long-term journey of becoming human together. And for me, that's what restitution brings to this profound challenge of dealing with this inequality in our country.
I also just want to add to the resolution is that it is the equality with equity. Is that an example I want to make is that when a rural child, when I want to make to the resolution is that for a rural child, even if you get a bursary, sometimes that bursary that you get to the university, you need to pay your whole family from that bursary. So it's not just about the bursary that you have access or the opportunity has been created. You need to look at what is the other factors around that person to have the holistic development of this young people to thrive then in the circumstances. So I think when we talk about the restitution and opportunity, we need to couple opportunity with equity as well.
Okay, cool. So I had an entire presentation, but I will not do it any justice. And I don't think my definition of restitution will do this summit any justice either. But what I will do now is that I'll offer practical solutions on a student level. What does restitution mean for me as a student activist in Stellenbosch? And how do I think that we can actually have more access to social justice through the government, and how the government can be better in their endeavors? Now, the reason why there is a need for restitution is because of policies and social engineering. And that is why I said in one of my questions earlier is that apartheid was legal. And that is what causes the need, for restitution. And what the democratic government did wrong was that when they invalidated all the laws that were illegal, there was no intentionality or a plan as to how do we not just reverse the illegality of them, but how do we actually restore that dignity as we, deliberated yesterday. And this is my call then to the Constitutional Court also, that they need to actually hold government accountable. And there is a word for it. It is a remedy in our law. And it's called the structural indictment. And we've seen it in cases like the Komape case, whereby a child slipped into a toilet at school and got hurt. And the Constitutional Court was like, we are not just saying that this was wrong, but we have practical steps that we're going to take to hold you accountable. And also, how then do we approach, or how does government, in actual fact, approach access to social justice? Because it's been said a lot today, but then I just want to give you guys a few pointers that I wrote down. So in terms of GBV, there's also an area of law that deals with incomplete crimes. And as a child who lives in Tafelsig and also lives in Khayelitsha, I see women who get battered, I see women who get raped. And because there's no proof and policemen are not actually interested in this story, it does not constitute a crime because there's no significant evidence. Whereby in our law, last year in criminal law, I was taught that there is a crime that is incomplete, wherein a person has taken that decision to go forward with a crime but did not complete it. The law doesn't fill that gap. And this is a very personal touch. It's a very personal story to me because my neighbor was also sexually harassed and I was a witness to that. But because she's scared of the system, incomplete crimes could not even relate to her because she has no proof and there needs to be. So honestly speaking, I really feel that government should do more in that area of incomplete crimes, more specifically to GBV, because that's a reality we face in Khayelitsha. And also to government. They must allow young people to be in the spaces with intention, because I feel like we are tokenized. When young people are in the round, everyone is interested. but then government is not putting us into government. The Youth League is dead. And it's not dead because I'm not saying maybe there is no passion or whatnot, but the system is gate kept. The system is gate kept, and young people aren't having that opportunity. And when people speak up, I don't favor any political party, but when people speak up, EFF wise, we just batter them and then just tell them chaotic, whereby truths are given to us by young people and they are not taken seriously. Now, what do I think needs to be restituted? Now, I said as a student, I'll be offering practical solutions. The economic model of Stellenbosch University. If it were not for NSFAS as a Black student, I would be living a life that is of a lost dog. And all of these privileges that I enjoy are not privileges that all Black students enjoy. And I think the university needs to actually reestablish and rethink their model on the COB. And also, as I said, in my personal capacity, access to policing. Police do not read. That's our problem in South Africa. Our policemen do not read. Our entire criminal system is based on them, but our policemen don't even get enough training that is even near equivalent to an LLB degree. And that is why we see these gaps in our society. Because the Criminal Procedure Act is literally all about police and the law, and our policemen, I don't even know how long they sit behind a desk. And therefore they are, and yet they are the people responsible for making sure that they know the law and also implement the law. Now, coming back to government, I'll close now. So how can government then improve the access to social justice, and how can they make it better? If there is a problem amongst government, and we've seen it with a few members of parliament, is that they attack the constitution. And my biggest problem with that is that why attack the constitution when the constitution allows you to change the constitution if you think that you actually need to change, the constitution? And also the binding nature of the South African Human Rights Commission. Did you guys know that their deliberations and their findings are not binding, but the findings of the public protector are binding? And that is my problem also. I did an assignment on it earlier this year, that an entire Chapter 9 institution responsible for the implementation of human rights does not have a binding nature. They are an educative tool. They're not a compulsory or a binding nature in terms of their binding nature. And also there's a lot of overlap in financial parastatals. We have the National Treasury, we have the Auditor General, we have the Minister of Finance, yet money is still lost. And also that gap needs to also be filtered in through. And they must also start reshuffling ministers. Fikile Mbalula has been here and many other people, but then the market or the government is not opening the space for young people yet once again. Again, it's legacy over skill. It's legacy over young people. It's tradition over young people. And we see that in Stellenbosch too. And my question as a student in Stellenbosch is that, yes, you might preach transformation, but are you prepared to let go of your legacies? Because Stellenbosch is built on a legacy. And if you're going to sell us transformation, you must be willing to say that I am willing to give up these buildings. You can't leave it halfway. And that is another thing I implore as a student there, is that if you're going to support the cause for student activism, disability access, you must make sure that you are willing to cut down the structural inequalities and make sure that everyone actually has access to that place. Because the one thing I've realized also, the one thing I've realized is that they support transformation, but they don't support getting rid of legacy and getting rid of all the people that contribute to that injustice and all of that inequality. And I'm going to leave you guys with a quote by Russell Botman. And it says, "Our diversity objectives are not a numbers game, but the expression of a striving for human dignity for all, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, or diversity of learning needs. We also need to work hard to assist the poor to gain access to our university." And this is the important part. "We can only feel satisfied that there is fair access when the daughter of the farm worker has the same future opportunities as the son of the farmer." Thank you.
Thank you. I see our dear colleague, Ms. Maluleka, is in the room. I think she can facilitate on her behalf. You just have to unmute yourself, ma'am. Ms. Maluleka, you just have to unmute yourself, please.
He doesn't want to unmute. I see, she said.
Okay, so while we're gonna sort out the technical difficulties with Advocate Joyce Maluleka, I'm going on to Ms. Nompumelelo Nzimandi Mbele to make her opening statement with regards to public governance, democratic leadership, and access to justice.
Is she winning?
Ms. Nzimanda Mbele, you're not here? Okay, so we'll move on to Mr. Mike Bedley to make his opening statement with regards to public governance, democratic leadership, and access to justice.
Thank you, colleague. So I have prepared a few slides. Is this the point at which I should share, or do you want something different right now?
Time is very limited.
Time is very limited on our side, sir. If you just can make your opening statement. Yes.
Okay.
We have the technical. Sorry, sir, dear colleague. We have the technical support with us. You can make your slides available.
Okay, so I'll do that then.
We're just getting Mike Batley.
So I'm going to present a summary of how we apply this system. This is the theory that I'm aware of. It's from the Library of Justice of Justice. And so as you can see there,
Mr. Bedley, Mr. Bedley,
of the criminal justice process rather than or rehabilitation.
Mr. Bedley, can I stop you there quickly?
Yes.
We can't hear you properly. Can you check if the input of your mic is correct, or yeah, because it's on your side, we can't hear you properly.
You can go out and come back again.
It's you have to try to balance your internet, sir.
We've got load shedding at the moment, so I guess the strength is not okay. I'll try and manage without the slides then. Restorative justice. All right. Yeah, I'll just manage without the slides. Restorative justice developed in the context of an awareness of the inadequacy of the criminal justice system and the prevailing ways of thinking there. It's since developed into other areas like school discipline, for example. The focus has generally been on interpersonal harm. And I think one of the challenges that the restorative justice movement is facing at the moment is how do we connect that response in meaningful ways to structural macro issues and to transformation initiatives. Now, in theory, South Africa has a very supportive environment for restorative justice. There are a number of local historical precedents for the use of restorative justice, of which the TRC was one. There are a number of other stories as well. And if you're interested, I would recommend our website, rjc.coza, where we've portrayed several of these stories. In the Criminal Procedure Act, there's a specific provision in Section 300 for compensation orders. But my understanding is that that has become rather unwieldy and it's not actually used very much at the moment. But Section 297, which makes provision for suspensive conditions of a sentence, that is really tailor-made for restitution orders. And that has been used and is being used. Don't really have a sense of the scale of that, but that is something that can actually be done quite easily with all criminal sentences. We have a number of superior court precedents that support the use of restorative justice. Going back to 2008, the last one that I'm aware of was 2014. Again, there's a list of those on our website. We have a sort of policy environment. Over the last 25 years, there have been a number of white papers that endorsed it. The Probation Services Act refers to it. The Child Justice Act is very specifically rooted in it. Then we have a draft national policy framework that was finalized in 2015. And then more recently, from the Civil Secretariat for the Police Service, we have a draft integrated crime prevention strategy, 2021. But there's no action plan to implement and support restorative justice practice. So in the last 10 to 12 years, from a civil society perspective, the level of implementation has actually reduced. That national policy framework seems to have been forgotten. And I would like to propose that this conference makes a call for that national policy framework to be revisited and for that integrated crime prevention strategy to be finalized and implemented. Thank you very much.
Sir, can you just repeat the last part of your statement? Your call for action for this conference?
That the conference makes a call for the national policy framework, that one that I referred to from 2015, as well as the integrated crime prevention strategy from the Safety Secretariat, for that to be revisited and implemented.
Thank you, sir. Advocate Joyce Maluleka, is your sound sorted?
She's thinking this is but she can't.
Oh, okay.
So she's just going to give it to you.
And who's next? Tracy Ledger. Can you make your opening statement, please?
Sure, thanks. What I wanted to talk about is particularly the area of governance. It's the area that I'm working in the most. And I think that for us in our research, a lot of the underlying questions are, how do social justice and restitution priorities, which are contained in documents like the Constitution and other policy documents, how do they actually translate into the administrative practices, which is what is actually gets done by the state and public servants every day? And I think there'd be little disagreements in this room that everyday practices of the state have little in common with what is written in these documents. The state that supposedly prioritizes transformation, restitution, and working for those who need the state the most often seems to be doing exactly the opposite. And the critical question then, of course, is why, followed by what could we do about it? This is not an easy or straightforward question to answer, and I'm not going to attempt to do so. Instead, I'd like to share some thoughts on the idea to stimulate a discussion. I know that there's a fondness for simple explanatory narratives of corruption and incompetence. But while these are often contributing factors, they're not the only explanation. And sometimes they're not part of the explanation at all. Many state organizations are filled with competent and committed people. They just don't deliver the spirit of social justice or restitution in what they do. And sometimes they actually do real harm. Let me give you a short example of what I'm talking about. Universal access to basic services, electricity, water, and sanitation, are critical for reducing poverty and inequality. Access improves health and education outcomes. It positively impacts food insecurity. It creates opportunities to engage in economic activity. And the fact that so many South Africans were denied access to those services in the past was a key driver of economic exclusion and poverty. And as a result, local government's most important mandate is to deliver universal access. But under the current model, those services must be paid for. And before anyone hops up and down about free basic services, let me just say that policy has been a dismal failure. Hardly anyone benefits. So under this paid for services model, many people are not paying for services, which has dire consequences for local municipalities. So then you have to say, why are people not paying? Well, my explanation would be that this is directly related to poverty. 25% of all South African households live below the food poverty line, which means that their entire monthly income is not sufficient to pay for a minimum nutrition basket of food. Those households cannot afford to pay anything for basic services without making their poverty worse. And it is poverty is the main reason why households are not paying for services. But when you have this discussion with senior state officials, many of whom are without a doubt ethical and committed individuals, they will tell you that the problem is this culture of non-payment, that people are supposedly choosing not to pay for their services, and that the answer is either to go and explain to them why they must pay for them, or else to be, harsher on people and do more disconnections. So what they've done in this is they've effectively rendered the poverty of millions of households invisible and thus not requiring attention. And as a result, millions of households are being impoverished by the provision of the very services that were intended to improve their lives. Now, the only way that these public officials have come to this conclusion that the problem is one of attitude and not one of circumstances is because there's no interest within the state about the reality of people's lives, the very people that they're supposedly committed to giving a better life. People only make these erroneous assumptions about why poor households don't pay for services because they can't be bothered to actually find out what the reason is. And as a result, the state spends millions each year on trying to force the poor to pay instead of spending millions on finding a better approach to service delivery. And I think that brings us to questions of morality. A morality that encompasses much more than just honesty in dealing with state resources, but a morality that underpins our conceptualization of what kind of state we aspire to be, and most importantly, how the state acts as a result. And just in closing, some thoughts. Professor Joan Tronto describes what she terms the ethic of care. And her conceptualization is based on turning concern for others, which is what we have in all our progressive laws and policy documents, into meaningful action. And her ethic of care has 4 components: attentiveness, responsibility, competence, and responsiveness. I just want to highlight the first one, attentiveness. Attentiveness means that we pay attention to the needs of others, that we do not ignore them. When we look away, we are guilty of a form of moral evil. The remedy to this inattentiveness is greater attentiveness. But how do we differentiate between ignorance, that is not knowing what's going on, and inattentiveness? And a lot of people would say, oh, but I didn't know that, or I wasn't aware of that. Tronto takes a hard line here, and I agree with her. We have a fundamental responsibility to notice other people. And in today's age of instant and all-pervasive information, we could say that what is called ignorance is almost always a form of inattentiveness. Most of us have so much information at our disposal that we could choose to know about the lives of others, but we choose not to. And this is a moral evil. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
We'll move on to Dr. Kristen Konimienko. Dr. Kirsten.
Hi, everyone. And I just wanted to say I'm also joined by Sandra Mape, and maybe she could just take a moment to introduce herself. Sandra, if you're there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Mape. I don't know what else to say, but I suppose, yeah, we'll get to know each other as the session progresses. Thanks.
The title of the talk is speaks a bit to some of the things we've already heard today. It's reconciliation, conciliation, which has a strike through, and then conciliation and restitution, land acknowledgement, performative assuaging of white guilt, or a step toward finding humanity in truth telling. The difference between reconciliation and conciliation has actually been pointed out by many Indigenous elders here in Canada. Because reconciliation, of course, assumes that there was a good relationship to start with that you've then lost and are now recapturing. So the practice of land acknowledgement has grown out of our Truth and Reconciliation that found our government guilty of cultural genocide, which was, of course, patterned after the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Most institutions have a very brief, sort of one-sentence land acknowledgement that is on our emails and that is stated at gatherings and so on. And so now that's brought up the question of has it become just a transactional statement that really allows the status quo to be maintained? And so I'd like to share with you the acknowledgement that I've worked on through speaking with elders and reading and so on. So I'll share that with you now. I understand that for some, the following statement may be heard as part of a land protocol. and for others like myself, an acknowledgement of past and present colonialisms. It is not a transactional statement to make peace and perpetuate the status quo. I live in a house built from pine extracted from forests on lands in the interior Salish region of Turtle Island, today known as British Columbia, Canada. This small house's modernist design is rooted in legacies of European philosophy. Its form sits in contrast to a nearby circular pit that is being reabsorbed by the forest, a visual echo of the kukuli or roundhouse common to the Secwepemctsín before the cultural erasure of colonialism. This region was not negotiated by treaty and remains to this day unceded or stolen. I am a third-generation squatter, yet our current system does not criminalize my squatting. Immediately around where I stay, this loss of land impacts the Splatcheen, Neskonwith, and Squilax peoples. I benefit from their loss through intergenerational wealth and the security of land ownership. I have no foothold of exclusion from the story of white colonization. Generations ago, my grandfather sailed from England in 1635 as a Puritan preacher, silenced by his archbishop and seeking religious freedom in the so-called New World. In 1637, he and fur trader Simon Willard negotiated 6 square miles of land for a few metal tools and European textiles from Squaw Sequan, known to be the great queen of the tribe of Sagamore to Hatuan Mescadid of the Algonquin. An early example of the conflicting cultural and socio-political perspectives of living on the land versus owning the land that paved the way to dispossession. The Mescadid were not nomadic people, as is popularized in white narratives. Their stories tell of Crow, who gave people seeds and taught them how to grow corn, beans, and squash. In exchange, the Crow returns every year at harvest time to claim their share of corn. I apologize for these actions that have led to loss and the consequential loss of opportunities. I also live and work in Johannesburg, South Africa, or Zania, on Veld that is the traditional lands of the San and the Sotho-Twana peoples. Significant gold deposits were discovered in both the Jukskei River of Gauteng and the Thompson River of British Columbia in the mid-1850s, triggering colonial mechanisms of land appropriation and enclosure, forced displacement of people and communities thousands of years old, cultural assimilation, and resource extraction from the land. Many of these in varying forms continue to this day. In both the regions known as Canada and the US, colonists bought, sold, and enslaved African people and indentured Asian people to drive this economy. This statement is part of my own reckoning with my participation in inherited legacies of past and present colonialisms, as I grapple to rehumanize my mind and way of walking in the world. I have benefited from teachings on land and living in non-hierarchical relationship from Splatcheen friends and colleagues, and from elders and youth of other unique cultures that are today both surviving and thriving across Turtle Island, Kuksjam. My friends in Joburg have taught me the violent impact of my own white body in space, but have also pushed me to a richer ways of knowing and understanding the unseen world around me. To the ancestors and beings of the landscapes I inhabit, I contribute in my roles as a designer and educator to ongoing actions towards living in right relations with the land, rocks, water, and people with fins, legs, wings. And as an activist, to keep asking the question, what is decolonization? To decentering myself, to making space for and respecting as unique and equal other perspectives, to listening, to breaking and eroding white social contracts that keep the power structures of white supremacy in place, and to guard against reframing more palatable colonialisms. And I acknowledge that we have a long way to go. And I always like to ask to hold the space for just a moment to honor the reality of what that statement means, and challenges all of us to act on.
Dear colleague, I have to push you there. In the essence of time, we need to move on to Dr. Ndabiseng Muleko. Is she in the room? She's not in the room, and then I will go on to Danai Nando.
Can I just ask if there for 2 minutes for Sandra to respond?
Colleague, I have to be very strict now in the essence of time. I'm really sorry. We need to get the opinion of Ms. Danai Nandu, please.
Yeah, we're definitely pressed for time. I think I wouldn't be able to probably go through everything that I prepared for today. So my work is in the human rights space, intersecting human rights and social justice. And at the center of the work that I do is trying to make sure that the voice of the ordinary citizen, there's a bit of an echo, just give me a second. So at the center of the work that I do is to try and make sure that the voice of the ordinary citizen is front and center of the narrative related to the challenges that they face. When I was practicing human rights law, I had a client called Ben Mafani, who was part of the forced removals that happened in 1979, close to what was Port Elizabeth. And at the time, they were moved to an area called Glenmore. He lost his wife and 3 children. And over the course of the years post-apartheid, he really felt like he was going to get, or thought he was going to get, some level of restitution. And in order to try and get the attention of the government, of the authorities, he had a silent protest that he did year on year, where he threw 3 stones into the windows of the High Court. And I remember being very touched by his plight, especially at the time, because we could only assist him as a client through a legal aid clinic, but realizing that he was trying to stand up for something that was much bigger than himself, but he only had his voice behind the protest and the narrative that he was creating. The work that I do now essentially tries to bring together the voice of the masses behind them creating petitions that essentially represent the voices of different people, and bringing those voices and marrying those voices with structure, with process, in order to make sure that the voices are heard. For a lot of people, petitions seem like a frivolous exercise, but what I can tell you effectively is that we have a constitutional right to petition. It is in our constitution. Every citizen has a right to petition. Parliament has a right to receive petitions. We can give petitions to government departments. We can petition for anything that we see that needs recourse within our own frame, but in this case, with the context of restitution. A lot of my work has been centered around restitution in the area of education and the vast injustices that happened in that sector, and the fact that the legacy of apartheid and the apartheid structure related to education was inherited. But what did not happen was a counter action to make sure that the deep education debt that was there would be serviced by making sure that there were restitutive efforts, whether they were in the form of proper infrastructure, whether it was toilets. The fact that children are still drowning in toilets now in 2022 is an absolute travesty. Essentially, when I look at restitution, I would like to see citizens understanding the power of leveraging technology to bring a collective voice together. The season of crying on your own about an issue or a legacy issue and thinking that it affects you or your small community, that season is over. Technology allows us to come together, put together. So I'm going to take you through a very quick 3-step process. So for me, it's in order for us to be able to step into a situation where we move away from state-centric restitution, so a top-down approach. You're going to set up a TRC, then it's going to cascade to the people, but rather have the people represent their own voice. What we actually need to do is to make sure that we can empower them to be able to understand the issues that are inherited legacies of injustice, to understand that they have a narrative and a voice to speak about them, to understand that there's a power in that story and that there are others like them who will rally behind them in the form of petitions. Once they have that, we want to make sure that the restitutive process can encourage ordinary citizens to start these petitions, to garner through working on these petitions to make sure that they take advantage of Section 27 of the Constitution that creates that right for them to be able to present petitions. Most citizens do not know you can petition in Parliament. Most people do not know that you can petition and present your petition in Parliament. We saw it recently. I'm sure all of you South Africans were outraged about the 22 million rand flag. Most people do not understand how that flag was essentially scrapped in the end. It was scrapped because an ordinary citizen decided to start a petition that was presented in Parliament and eventually led to the scrapping of the flag. Recently, with what occurred in Stellenbosch with Tiens du Toit, another student started a petition. That petition garnered over 100,000 signatures, and that was presented to Stellenbosch when they were doing the disciplinary hearings for the student. Petitions play such a critical role, but when we're able to marry them with technology, it means that we're not limited geographically anymore. Our voices are not silent in our own little communities. We can garner the support of hundreds and thousands who can stand with us on these issues, especially those restitutive issues that have been lagging for so long, like issues like education, like I said. To cap it off or to end it, this is probably the quickest summary I've ever done. Essentially, I want to say restitution should not feel like a gift that citizens are being given for loyalty. Every citizen, without limitations, economic, educational, should be able to have a voice. And I am strongly advocating for citizens to be empowered to understand what their rights are and that they can bring a collective voice together, leverage petitions, the power of technology, platforms like mine at change.org, and be able to use people power to make sure that their voices are heard. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, dear colleague. There is more time, so I would like to give Ms. Kristen that 2 minutes that she asked.
Thank you. That's actually Sandra, who is presenting with me.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Are you able to hear me, Kristen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so this is just a response, and I'll try to be brief and to the point. So I think this is connecting. I think it ties in with Danai and what she was talking about. But essentially, centered with the land question is the notion of ownership, access, and justice. Can land really be owned? Should land be owned? Do we feel entitled to so that we can own land? And instead of a participation and communion with the land, the other things to think about is whose land is it anyway, and how far back do we acknowledge? And who should do the acknowledging and for whom and to what end? Is this a case of white guilt? Is this a case of easing one's conscience? Or is it actually bringing restorative justice to the people that need it? Furthermore, it interrogates the notion of justice and what suffices as just restitution. Is a land acknowledgement enough? Can it account for the years and years of exploitation, trauma, moral and cultural genocide endured by many, many communities across the world, and particularly in this country? However, I would say that admission of guilt goes a long way towards facilitating some sort of healing and dialogue. To hear a perpetrator admit, "I did it," may allow the victims to process their pain. However, it is not enough, and it can never be enough unless it leads to tangible change and action, i.e. in the case of Rwanda, despite forgiveness that is a key pillar and cornerstone of our democracy, it does demand some sort of action and tangible justice and change for the victims that were involved. Land acknowledgement should lead to access. South Africa's land reform program has been slow due to the willing buyer, willing seller clause on the protection of property rights. South Africa belongs to all who live in it and dwell in the country, but does it actually really belong to everyone? If there's a deliberate choice to privilege the existing property rights of some over others, is it fair that those dispossessed should bear the brunt of oppression and there's no expectation on those who dispossess land from others? And how can it possibly lead to any change if the socioeconomic position and ownership has not shifted since our democratization? And how can that lead to social cohesion? To what extent is the law serving the needs of the entire nation? If the law and the market-based acquisition still favors historically advantaged population in our country. Therefore, land acknowledgement is a kind gesture. It's heard, and I think it's much needed, but it mocks those dispossessed unless it demands a shift in land ownership and quality of life for those dispossessed. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to open the floor for questions from the people that's around the table here by us. Just to recap on what everybody said, we started with Dr. Willem Verwoerd. He said there's a gap between policy and what happens on the ground. Banzai Botterman said government should be held accountable. How can government improve access to social justice? Mr. Mike Batley asked that the conference look at restorative justice, the national policy framework drafted by the Department of Justice. Ms. Tracy Ledger said, why poor households, why government invest into poor houses that doesn't pay? Government should invest to deliver better services. Ms. Christian Koneko said the role of reconciliation in restitution. Danai Nandu, the power of petitions and how that can be used. So the floor is open for questions.
So, if I may. If I may. Yes, we have a case in Stellenbosch whereby removals took place and land were awarded to the people affected by the removals. Now still, we are in the area where we were moved to, and the same thing is happening on the land that we were given when we were removed in the first place. So how do we get restorative justice, and how do we better ourselves and our communities when we are constantly uprooted? And how do we forgive? If it happens, it's a cycle. It happens all the time. We don't want money. Not everything is about money. But the resources that come in to places where people were disadvantaged, how do we take that communities forward?
I will allow another question so that we can handle all the questions at one time at the end. The panel will be responsible to answer the questions. Is there any more questions?
Afternoon to the presenters. My question goes to Sis Danai Nando. Can you please just assist me, Sis Glenda Iti? Are there protests? And as you say that we must make protests and petitions, if I heard you correctly, I may be wrong. Are they still that much effective? The reason why I'm asking is that with protests that we see lately, they go with some element of violence and some destructions of properties at times which are not relevant to what you are actually protesting for. And people become uncontrollable and they do unintended, things. Versus using the structures that are more civil, more orderly, to influence your demands to be considered. Which way would you say is the best? Because going the orderly manner, it means it has to do somehow with being organized and understanding the rules of the game. Whereas on the other side, no rules of the game necessarily are needed there. You just go out there and make the biggest or whatever noise. Now, I'm saying this now in the context of schools, as you were much passionate about the education space there, because we are having a serious challenge not only from the government side, also from the inside in the schools, in terms of commitment and passion from the teachers for a number of reasons that seem to be eroded. I don't know. You can maybe assist there. I'm not sure if my question is clear.
Is there any more questions, dear colleagues?
Hi, my name is Kanti Masenge Mkota. I'm a student at Stellenbosch University. Okay. Hi, my name is Kanti. My surname is Mikocha. I'm a student at Stellenbosch University and a social justice advocate. Right, my question is based on like the policies that are introduced in government and the way the whole governance is being upholded. Right, because we speak of empowering the youth. We speak of like he said, the NSFAS bursaries, we speak of having internships, your National Youth Development Fund and whatever, but then we don't equip those learners to actually make it, and it's not even sustainable because, like we said, the university is a privilege to most South African students, and that's a sad reality for you to actually, for me to be here being a Black person is a privilege, and it shouldn't be like that. And it starts with the unequal education from the lower levels, from primary schools where they do not have access, like she said, to textbooks, where they use toilets that are just, they're not up to standard. And that's an issue because right now we have a minister who, the basic education minister, has been there for as long as I've lived, basically, and we haven't seen any changes whatsoever, right? We put those kind of people in those kind of positions, and they really don't know how it feels like to be at the bottom. They don't know how it feels like to survive on a 350, and that's taking so long. That might take 2 months to actually come through. So my question is based on the way we structure and the way we put people in power, because now it's not a basis of you wanting to be a leader and you wanting to help out. If we can ask them to actually spend a night in Khayelitsha, if you ask them to spend a night in Nyanga, in Alexandria, they probably wouldn't do that. You ask yourself why. They're going to tell you it's not a habitable place. But why do you expect somebody else to be in that kind of situation?
Thank you for that question, dear colleague. Let's start with we have 4 minutes to wrap this up and answer the questions. Ms. Lamise, what route should she follow to ask the question about the land that was taken from her in Stellenbosch? Where can she get information? What officers can she talk to? If someone can just answer that question, and then Ms. Nandu, the question was directly for you. With regards to protesting and petitions, and then if we can just wrap it up with the final question of how people are getting in power today. Over to you guys.
Okay, I can answer this question here. So I'm just going to build on Mr. Kasibe's opinion there about petitions and protests. As a student activist in Stellenbosch University, who was at the forefront of both the urination incidents and having scribed the recent SRC statement with the team based on the incidents, that I've realized that with order, right, there's not always a good solution, because the way they manipulate the system is that they draft policies, and if you go to and if you go against them through the route, they won't take you seriously because it's long. I mean, the CDC took months to draft a report, and in your to answer you too also is that it works. It really does work, whereby we petition and we do protest, because that's the quickest way to make sure that when they say we must take the long route, that we actually have our solution on the get-go. And as a result, they made the statement because of the pressure. And in terms of policies, I'm just going to say in the Stellenbosch University context, is that I'm also part of the SRC now as an activist, but I'm part of the SRC. Rest assured, we are quite chaotic. We do not fear asking questions. We do not fear questioning the fees increment. We do not fear asking what have you done about House Wuchte. We do not fear telling them that we are underpaid and that the student leadership movement is underfunded in itself, and that the unequal pay among student leadership. So I think, rest assured in that part, we are quite chaotic leaders. But your question towards the rectorate and towards maybe the management, I think it's much more deeper and way higher.
Ms. Nandu, can we give your input on that petition question and protest question? You have to unmute yourself, ma'am.
Thank you. Yeah, to respond to the gentleman who asked about petition, I think our model is holistic. At the center of it, we want to make sure that the voice of the masses is heard. So the crafting of a petition is essentially it's creating a collective space or a collective place where you can bring that voice together. But the petition in and of itself, so say it has 100,000 signatures, that is not going to cause the change. So it's one, in understanding what you're petitioning for, so what's your ask. Two, it's understanding who you're petitioning to, so who's that decision maker, and what is the change that you want to see. And a lot of times we actually marry some of the things that you've mentioned together in order to really galvanize the public pressure. So it's a combination of a petition that is done well, that is signed, it's delivered, but it's delivered at the end of a protest action. But the greater work is what happens after that delivery. And that is where I was speaking about, you need to marry the petitioning process with understanding the structure. So for me, I don't think people are intimidated by protests anymore. I think they know that we're going to go home, you know, at the end of it, we're going to go home. The idea of petitioning and marrying it with the protest and then submitting it to a specific decision maker that is within a specific structure is that you can follow through after the physical masses have left. And that's the greater work that we do. It's following the process, whether it's taken through a parliamentary committee. It's following up with the, a company, a corporate that has maybe not done something relative to a community or something that has occurred. So there's a whole process there. So a lot of times we think, okay, we protest, maybe we get interviewed on TV, that's the response. It's everything that happens after the protest, it's everything that happens after the delivery. That's the greater work that we focus on. So we then work with ordinary citizens who we know know what they want. Most times they don't know how to get to what they want, or they're not sure about what is the structure that will allow them to get there. So I wouldn't, like I said, discard of protest action. I think it's pretty critical. It shows the physical, manifestation of people coming together. But at the same time, like I said, you go home and you need something that goes beyond the protest, something that goes beyond the delivery, and that's the greater work that we do. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there someone that can answer the question of Ms. Lamise de Klerk with regards to where can she get information or help with regards to land that was stolen?
Can I quickly attempt?
Yep.
I'm not sure how well knowledgeable you are in this regard, Mr. Nye, but I would suggest the Human Rights Commission, and I'm not sure how accessible it is because it does deal with constitutional matters, which is Section 25 in terms of the Land Tenure Bill, and there's been a recently published bill, and I'm not sure to what extent that bill will actually help Ms. Lamise's situation. But is the Human Rights Commission the people that she can approach? Are they the approachable person? And if not, do you have maybe any ideas, or is it effective to some extent? If you can be a bit quite honest with that, that's my answer, sort of like a question to you also.
Yeah, I think my background is more in the legal aid structure, which is where I practiced my work the most. And we did have cases that related to the story that I spoke to you about with Ben Mafani. So I'd probably start there before heading directly to the Human Rights Commission. I think so that you can get someone who can, I think what I don't get a full sense of just from the question is the full history, is a document. There's a lot that would need to be understood in order to figure out how to go forward.
Just to wrap up, guys. From my side, thank you all for being here. If there's any final comments from you on the chat, let's keep it short, make it 2 minutes. Your final input from our side. We are done on this side. Any inputs from you guys? Thank you. So we can close this session and say very much thank you, guys. Thank you, dear colleagues. Have a pleasant evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, colleagues. It was great presenting with all of you.
Cheers. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Maybe it's how I've structured my question. I've got this feeling that go for a public